The old manor at Hollow Grove had stood for over a century, nestled deep within the woods of a remote village. It was a grand, Gothic structure, its walls covered in creeping ivy, and its windows long shattered by time and neglect. To the villagers, it was a place of dread and whispers, a place where the boundary between the living and the dead was perilously thin. Evelyn and Mark Thompson, a young couple with a penchant for historical restoration, had recently purchased the manor at a suspiciously low price. They arrived on a dreary autumn afternoon, the sky overcast and threatening rain. As their car crunched up the gravel driveway, Evelyn felt a shiver run down her spine, but she brushed it off as excitement. "This place has so much potential," Mark said, his voice echoing with enthusiasm. "We can restore it to its former glory." Evelyn nodded, but her eyes were fixed on the looming structure ahead. There was something unsettling about the manor, something that whispered warnings in the back of her mind. But they were here now, and they had a job to do. As dusk fell, the couple settled into the manor's only habitable room, which they had cleaned and furnished with their belongings. The wind howled outside, rattling the loose window panes. Evelyn lit a fire in the grand fireplace, its flickering light casting eerie shadows on the walls. "Did you hear that?" Evelyn asked suddenly, looking up from the fire. Mark paused, listening. "Hear what?" "A whispering. From upstairs." Mark chuckled. "Old houses make noises, Evie. Don't let it get to you." But Evelyn couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. That night, as they lay in bed, the whispering grew louder. It was as if 1,000 voices were murmuring just beyond the walls. Evelyn tossed and turned, her dreams filled with shadowy figures and ghostly faces. The next morning, they began their work in earnest, starting with the grand foyer. As they peeled back layers of old wallpaper, they uncovered strange symbols etched into the plaster beneath. Mark dismissed them as old, forgotten decorations, but Evelyn felt an inexplicable sense of foreboding. By afternoon, Mark decided to take a break and explore the manor's library. The room was vast, with towering bookshelves filled with dusty tomes. As he perused the shelves, he came across an old leather-bound journal. The cover was unmarked, but the pages inside were filled with entries dating back to the 1800s. Meanwhile, Evelyn had ventured into the basement, searching for tools. The air grew colder as she descended, and an oppressive silence filled the space. She felt an icy hand brush against her shoulder and spun around, but there was no one there. She rushed back upstairs, her heart pounding. That evening, Mark shared his discovery with Evelyn. They sat by the fire, reading the journal together. It belonged to the manor's original owner, a man named Dr. Jonathan Holloway, who had been a physician and an occultist. The entries spoke of dark rituals and summoning spirits, of a malevolent entity that Dr. Holloway had accidentally unleashed. He described how the entity tormented his family, driving them to madness and death. The last entry was a desperate plea for forgiveness, written in shaky handwriting. "We need to leave," Evelyn said, her voice trembling. "This place is cursed." Mark, however, was skeptical. "It's just an old journal, Evie. There's no such thing as curses." But that night, the whispering returned, louder and more insistent. The shadows in the corners of the room seemed to move with a life of their own. Evelyn could feel the entity's presence growing stronger. Desperate for answers, Evelyn suggested they hold a seance to communicate with the spirits haunting the manor. Mark reluctantly agreed, and they gathered in the parlor, lighting candles and placing a makeshift Ouija board on the table. As they began, the temperature in the room dropped, and a cold, palpable presence filled the air. The planchette moved slowly at first, then with increasing speed. "Who are you?" Evelyn asked. The planchette spelled out, "Holloway." "What do you want?" "Revenge." Evelyn shuddered. "How can we help you?" The planchette paused, then spelled out, "Leave or suffer." At that moment, the candles flickered and went out, plunging the room into darkness. A chilling, guttural laugh echoed around them, and they felt a cold wind whip through the room. The seance had awakened something far more powerful and malevolent than they had anticipated. Over the next few days, the haunting escalated. Doors slammed shut on their own, objects flew across rooms, and the whispering grew into an incessant chorus of voices. Mark began to see shadowy figures lurking in the corners of his vision, their eyes glowing with malevolence. Evelyn, too, was affected. She would wake up with scratches on her arms and legs, inflicted by unseen hands. The entity seemed to take pleasure in their fear, feeding off their terror. One night, Mark woke to find Evelyn standing by the window, staring out into the darkness. Her eyes were vacant, and she murmured incoherently. He shook her, but she did not respond. It was as if she was in a trance. "Evelyn, wake up!" he shouted, but she remained unresponsive. Finally, with great effort, he managed to pull her away from the window. She blinked, as if waking from a deep sleep, and looked at him with confusion. "Mark, what happened?" "You were sleepwalking," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. "This place is getting to us. We need to leave." But it was too late. The entity had grown too strong, and the manor itself seemed to conspire against them. The doors and windows would not open, trapping them inside. Desperate and terrified, Mark and Evelyn barricaded themselves in the master bedroom. They could hear the entity moving through the halls, its whispers now a deafening roar. The air grew thick with a foul stench, and the temperature dropped to freezing. Suddenly, the door burst open, and the entity emerged. It was a grotesque, shadowy figure with glowing red eyes and elongated limbs. It moved with unnatural speed, its form shifting and writhing like smoke. Evelyn screamed as the entity lunged at them. Mark grabbed a candlestick and swung it at the apparition, but it passed through the entity harmlessly. The creature let out a chilling laugh, its voice echoing in their minds. "You cannot escape me," it hissed. "You belong to me now." Mark and Evelyn backed against the wall, their hearts pounding with terror. The entity reached out with clawed hands, and they felt an icy grip around their throats. They struggled to breathe, their vision darkening. But just as they were about to lose consciousness, the door to the room flew open, and a blinding light filled the space. The entity shrieked and recoiled, its form dissipating like smoke in the wind. Standing in the doorway was an old man, his face lined with age and wisdom. He held a crucifix in one hand and a vial of holy water in the other. His eyes were fierce with determination. "Be gone, foul spirit," he commanded, his voice strong and unwavering. The entity snarled and lunged at the old man, but he stood his ground. He splashed the holy water at the creature, and it let out a blood-curdling scream. The room shook as the entity writhed in agony. "You have no power here," the old man continued. "By the power of Christ, I banish you." With one final ear-piercing scream, the entity dissolved into nothingness. The room fell silent, and the oppressive atmosphere lifted. Mark and Evelyn gasped for air, their throats raw and sore. The old man approached them, his expression softening. "Are you both all right?" "Who are you?" Mark asked, still in shock. "My name is Father Benedict," he replied. "I was sent by the village priest. He sensed the disturbance and knew you were in danger." With Father Benedict's help, Mark and Evelyn managed to escape the manor. They left Hollow Grove behind, vowing never to return. The experience had left them shaken, but they were grateful to be alive. Back in the village, they sought counseling and support, trying to come to terms with the horrors they had faced. Father Benedict stayed in touch, offering guidance and reassurance. As time passed, the nightmares began to fade, and they slowly rebuilt their lives. They moved to a new town, far away from Hollow Grove, and resumed their work in historical restoration. But they never forgot the lesson they had learned. Some places are best left undisturbed. Years later, a new family moved into the old manor at Hollow Grove. The villagers watched with a mix of curiosity and dread, whispering warnings that went unheeded. The manor stood silent and foreboding, its dark history waiting to be awakened once more. And in the depths of the house, in the shadows where light dared not venture, a faint whisper could be heard, growing louder with each passing day. The entity had not been